When people are asked what springs to mind when they mention Berlin, many will picture Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party, and World War II. Even though this is understandable, there's so much more to this city than what the history books will tell you, and to link it only with such a troubled age is to do Berlin a great injustice. Berlin's origins date back to the 13th century. However, during this time, it was little more than a small settlement on the banks of the River Spree. Down through the ages, Berlin slowly grew, and by the mid-1600s there were over 20,000 people living here. As the centuries passed, expansion took the city in all directions, and it quickly developed as the capital of Prussia, before becoming the capital of the mighty German Empire. By the late 19th century, Berlin was one of the most powerful cities in Europe, with many great buildings gracing the streets, where there was immense wealth, and it was excelling in both cultural and scientific achievements. With a population of almost 2 million, by the 1900s, the German Empire, administered from Berlin, stretched into what today makes up parts of France, Poland, Russia and Denmark, and it seemed as if nothing could stop its continuous growth. But by 1914, the world was at war with the German Empire, and when the armistice was signed in 1918, after the German government surrendered, the land was taken back, and the nation forced by the Treaty of Versailles to accept responsibility for starting the war in the first place and pay huge amounts in compensation. This was a time of great hardship for the people of Berlin, and for that matter, Germany in its entirety. The hardship that resulted from the war debt caused a great deal of resentment, and when matters were made even worse by the worldwide depression that followed the Wall Street crash of 1929, the people of Germany were in desperate need of hope, whatever form it happened to take. Consequently, when, in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party came to prominence, offering a new empire and the restoration of national pride, where Hitler led, the people followed. But Hitler's crusade for world domination brought about some of the darkest days in history, as once more the world plummeted into bloody war. By the end of the Second World War in 1945, tens of millions of people had been killed, cities were left in ruins, and Berlin was no exception. Not surprisingly, as the centre of Hitler's operations, Berlin had been devastated by the fighting, and in the aftermath, Germany was divided into 4 zones of occupation, representing the victorious Allies, the Soviets, Americans, British and the French. Berlin too was divided 4 ways, and by the 1960s, a great wall had been erected, cutting through the city, dividing east and west. From 1961, when construction of the wall began, it's believed that many people were killed trying to escape from the Soviet-controlled East Berlin to the west. During the 1980s, the political changes in Eastern Europe had a dramatic effect on the city, and in 1989, Germany celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall. By 1990, the country was finally reunified, and over the following years, with Germany united again, the people of Berlin have been able to join together to create a truly beautiful city that deserves to be counted as one of the world's loveliest capitals. So, without further ado, considering Berlin's extremely turbulent past, we'll begin our tour of this fascinating city here at the gates of Checkpoint Charlie. it may not have the visual splendour of Berlin's more classic sites, or the charm of some of the city's more traditional districts, but it nevertheless sums up perfectly what Berlin has had to overcome. For almost 30 years, this forward-thinking and welcoming city had a completely different atmosphere, and Checkpoint Charlie is the epitome of this. When the Berlin Wall stood tall, separating the city's people, Checkpoint Charlie was one of the major crossings from East to West Berlin, and through its gates foreigners would pass to get from Soviet-controlled East Berlin to the more liberal West. This rather unassuming site became a symbol of both freedom and separation for the people of Germany. If you made it safely from East Berlin, you could escape the clutches of Russia's communist regime. However, in the same breath, the checkpoint was also a symbol of the dividing line in this city, and life was starkly different on either side. Because of many people's determination to get across Charlie, there were numerous escape attempts, and because of this, over the years this checkpoint became more heavily fortified to keep control. Nowadays, as you can see, there's little left of Checkpoint Charlie's defences. Gone are the barbed wire, fences and barriers. Yet an atmosphere of repression and separation still seems to linger around this area. After all, one thing the people of Berlin really have to be commended for is not trying to cover up their past. Nonetheless, Checkpoint Charlie is a symbol of how, after the Second World War, Berlin was totally torn apart and has been left on full display so that the people of the entire world can learn from this city's troubled times. Here, you'll find a very honest replica of the checkpoint cabin, and even though the area is often filled with tourists happily snapping away, it doesn't take too much imagination to understand what it must have been like when it was fully operational. And naturally, Checkpoint Charlie is a wonderful place from which to start our further exploration of the remaining segments of the Berlin Wall. From this spot, you can either investigate the Museum of Checkpoint Charlie, where segments of the wall are on display, or follow the line of bricks that now mark where the wall used to stand. Although today this is a favoured tourist expedition and an enjoyable way to discover the city, this will never diminish the fact that the Berlin Wall was a very sinister construction indeed. Shortly after World War II, the Russians blockaded Western Berlin, and the standoff signalled the start of the Cold War. By the 1950s, Russian East Berlin was struggling with great economic troubles. Riots broke out, and there was a mass exodus from East to West Berlin. The East German government decided that the best solution was to begin the construction of the Great Dividing Wall in 1961. The people in East Berlin were trapped, often separated from family and friends, and the face of the city was changed beyond recognition. Fortunately, since the fall of the wall in November 1989, what remains of the concrete structure stands as a tribute to those who suffered such heartbreak, while remaining as a permanent reminder of how the city has been brought back together. Most of the wall has now gone, but as you'd expect, there are still small remnants of this massive structure all around Berlin, and it really is worth hunting for them if you have the time. Many segments have been turned into public art displays, and the people are rightfully proud of these. To some, this might just look like a piece of grey concrete. However, to the people of Berlin, it's a symbol of their country's reunification in 1990, and a reminder of how hard they fought for their beloved city. Now, fascinating as these remains are, they can never be described as beautiful, and our next location is equally iconic, but has the classic elegance of Berlin's more gracious past. With its massive Greek-inspired pillars and magnificent horse-drawn sculpture perched on top, the Brandenburg Gate will afford you perhaps Berlin's most unforgettable sight. Originally completed in 1791 as one of the city's entrance gates, it has since then come to symbolise Berlin's power, and is undoubtedly why Adolf Hitler chose this spot to be the place where a torch-lit procession heralded the beginning of his plan for a 1,000-year Reich. And it's certainly easy to see why he chose the Brandenburg Gate to be the focal point for this military procession, providing a dramatic backdrop for his statement of intent. Standing at over 65 feet tall and 213 feet wide, this structure totally dominates this area of Berlin and is truly magnificent. Take a closer look at the gate, and you can really appreciate the astounding work that went into creating this structure. Every inch of the gate seems to be adorned with this stunning stonework, and the effort that must have gone into the carving of it would have been phenomenal. Gaze up at the huge pillars, and at the very top of the gate you'll see the grand sculpture of the Quadriga, which was created by Johann Gottfried Schadow, and it's a real visual delight. A quadriga is a 4-horse-drawn chariot that was used for racing, and you can see how Shadow's sculpture depicts the horses in action absolutely beautifully. In fact, this statue is so loved and appreciated around the world that after the defeat of the Prussian troops by Napoleon in 1806, the French Emperor decided to take the quadriga back to Paris with him as a sign of his victory. Fortunately, though, for the people of Berlin, it was only a few years later that Napoleon's power was on the wane, and the sculpture was rightfully returned to its native home. The plaza, over which the Brandenburg Gate stands guard, is certainly worthy of your attention too. The large and airy Pariser Platz appears to be a fairly modern inception, lined with new and contemporary buildings. However, like much of Berlin, this is due to the bombing during the Second World War, which reduced every building to rubble. Even so, as you wander around this wonderful space, the German government have done a fine job rebuilding this plaza, and it's now become a favourite spot for tourists and locals alike. The designers have worked extremely hard to ensure that the plaza has retained its airy atmosphere, and there's nothing quite like finding a bench here and just watching the world go by. But there's a great deal more of Berlin waiting to be discovered, and our next location is another truly remarkable site with an equally colourful history. The Reichstag was built by Paul Wallet between 1884 and 1894, and it was intended that his design would capture the then escalating feeling of German optimism. Berlin had just become the capital of the German Empire, and the city was developing as a beacon of enlightenment in Europe, the home of an impressive number of scientific and cultural triumphs. The Reichstag was to symbolise national unity, and being the German Houses of Parliament, it was intended to show the world how powerful the German Empire had become. When the Reichstag was finally completed, it expressed the mood of the people perfectly and became one of Berlin's best-loved structures. With its neo-Renaissance design, beautifully arched windows and magnificent pillars, the Reichstag is a proud sight, and the locals have adored it ever since it was first completed. If, however, you take a closer look at the building, particularly at the top of the Reichstag, you'll see that, like so much of Berlin, this structure too carries its own war wounds. On the night of February the 28th, 1933, a raging fire ripped through the building, destroying the Great Hall and leaving the Reichstag in tatters. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, who were on their rise to power, blamed the communists and used the fire to fuel their campaign to dominate German politics. Many believe it was actually the Nazis who started the blaze in the first place, and the destruction of the Reichstag came to symbolize the beginning of the upheaval that would result in World War II. Interestingly, the Nazis were too busy planning their new empire to bother about rebuilding the Reichstag, and the building lay mostly unused during their 12 years in power. However, once the war was over, the German government decided that it was high time this most important of buildings was resurrected, and the Reichstag was restored. Between 1957 and 1999, there have been a number of renovation projects, with the last one adding the fine glass dome that now sits at the top. Sir Norman Foster's dome fits in perfectly with the rest of the structure and faultlessly blends old with new to create an unforgettable sight. Both the Brandenburg Gate and the Reichstag are powerful symbols of German pride and nationalism. However, our next location, just a few hundred meters away, demonstrates Germany's willingness to remember its terrible mistakes and to show the world its remorse for the tragedies of the Second World War. This dramatic memorial was unveiled on May the 10th, 2005, as part of the 60th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, a perfect time for remembrance and reconciliation. To say that the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe, a tribute to the many thousands who lost their lives as a result of Hitler's Holocaust, will leave you speechless, is something of an understatement. When you first arrive and see the memorial spanning out over 19,000 square meters, you'll immediately get an impression of how important this place is. And then, as you delve deeper and really explore the area, its true power becomes almost overwhelming. All across this uneven concrete field are 2,711 concrete slabs of varying sizes, ordered into a grid system. The individual stels don't represent the lost souls as you might expect in such a memorial, but they're here to create an uneasy atmosphere, which in turn forces the visitor to think about the Holocaust and its tragic consequences. There's no set route through the memorial, but there are paths past each of the stels, meaning it would be possible to wander around here for hours, contemplating the horrific loss of life, or visiting the enlightening museum that's situated beneath the memorial. But it's now time to move on, just like many of the visitors you'll see here. This memorial was designed to fit in with Berlin as it is today, and it's fine that people often pass through this place on their way to other locations, and far from being a mark of disrespect, the memorial was intended to be a part of everyday Berlin life. After the deeply moving atmosphere of the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, it's time to visit the greener and more airy surroundings of the Tiergarten. So far, almost everything that we've explored has been shrouded in brass or concrete. But as you can see for yourselves, Berlin also has some wonderful open spaces. The Tiergarten used to be a royal hunting estate, and the park was definitely not accessible to the public. But fortunately, in the 18th century, its delights were opened up for everyone to enjoy. Since then, these wonderful gardens have become a favourite hideaway to escape the hustle and bustle of central Berlin, and it's a great place to come if you want to unwind for a few moments while exploring the city. Spreading out over 496 acres, the Tiergarten is huge, so don't worry if you're after a quiet spot all to yourself, you can normally find one there. But there's a great deal more to do if relaxation doesn't happen to be what you're looking for. If you can bear to pull yourself away from the picturesque ponds and tranquil paths, there are a whole host of landmarks just waiting to be discovered. Most visitors' eyes will immediately be drawn to this tall landmark, which is a great place to start, especially as it also happens to be the centre point of the park. This shining tower is the Siegessäule, or Victory Column, and was built to commemorate the victory of the Prusso-Danish War of 1864. Originally, however, it was just the huge tower that was built, and the golden figure perched on top was not added until the 1870s, after more Prussian victories in battle, and the overall effect is spectacular. Although the tendency is to look upwards, if you lower your gaze to the bottom, you'll find that the structure is just as interesting at the base. These wonderfully carved reliefs feature various victories, with each one depicting a different battle. And if you look closely, you can see bullet holes from a more recent conflict, when the Russian Red Army fought to take Berlin, bringing an end to the Second World War. Moving upwards, your eyes will spy the Hall of Pillars with the great glass mosaic before reaching the 4 separate sandstone columns that make up the bulk of the tower. You might be interested to know that originally there were only 3 columns to the tower. However, when it was moved by the Nazi government in 1938, they added the top column, which brought it to the current height of over 216 feet. Then, of course, at the pinnacle of the tower, you can't miss the glorious 35-ton angel, designed by Friedrich Drake. With her victory wreath and lifelike wings, Victoria has some of the best views over the Tiergarten, and if you're fit enough to climb the 285 steps to join her at the top, then the views really are breathtaking. But time is again our enemy, and for now we'll have to make do with gazing up at Victoria from down here, which is an equally memorable sight. Heading just to the north of the Victory Column, along Spreeweg, it won't be long before you come across the Schloss Bellevue, and you'll know straight away that you've come across another of the Tiergarten's loveliest treasures, with its imposing white facade. Originally built in 1786 by the architect Philip Daniel Bowman, it was intended for a Prussian prince and housed numerous royals in lavish style up until 1861. When the royals moved on, this brilliant white neoclassical building was far too impressive to leave empty, so it had many uses over the years, including that of a museum, a hotel for the Nazi government, and at the present time, it's the official Berlin residence of the German president. It must be quite an experience to wake up in one of the grand rooms and gaze out of the window across the Tiergarten, something we can sadly only dream of. However, just standing in the presence of this magnificent building is its own reward, and when you spend a little time here, you can understand why the Schloss Bellevue was chosen as the president's official residence. If you're able to pull yourself away from this magnificent spot and daydreams of living in such a place, we can enjoy the park for a little while longer. But if the weather isn't agreeable enough for meandering through parks and woodland, a visit to one of Berlin's breathtaking museums is to be recommended. Many of the visitors who flock to this city come in search of its intriguing past, and for this reason, one of the most popular and interesting locations in Berlin is the area that's come to be known affectionately as Museum Island. Nestled amongst the tributaries of the Spree, Museum Island is home to no less than 5 museums. At the top end of the island, you'll find the delightful dome-topped Bode Museum, designed especially by Ernst von Einer to fit neatly into the small wedge at the island's tip, and as you can see, it fits the space perfectly. Walking around the museum, it's possible to see why it's become such a landmark in Berlin, as every part of the museum is impeccably designed, from the statues that skirt the outside of the roof to the huge arches which shelter the entrances, all carefully thought out to be aesthetically pleasing. Inside, there are just as many delights to uncover, ranging from old coins and medals to priceless artworks from all over the world. The collection in Bode Museum is probably one of the finest to be found in Berlin, and when matched with the wonderful building that houses it, makes for a remarkable experience. But this isn't to suggest you should spend all your time in the Bode Museum though, for there are plenty more cultural delights to explore on the island. The Unter National Gallery houses a great art collection with works from the classical and romantic periods to paintings from the French Impressionists and early modernists, as well as an array of beautiful statues. You'll also notice that the museum is shaped like a Roman temple and was originally designed by no less a mortal than a king. Friedrich August Stuller, who planned the building in 1865, took his inspiration from a sketch by King Frederick William IV of Prussia, who was far more interested in architecture and landscape gardening than royal duties, fighting battles and politics. However, should you be in the mood for a little more adventure, you can journey back in time through the breathtaking archaeological finds of the Pergamon Museum. This huge museum houses one of the most famous collections of antiquities in Europe, and owes its name to the magnificent Pergamon altar, which you can find taking pride of place in the main entrance hall. This opulent structure, dating back to the 2nd century BC, was originally built in the ancient Greek city of Pergamon, modern-day Bergamo in Turkey, and boasts a 113-metre-long sculptural frieze, which is considered to be a masterpiece of Hellenistic art. The frieze is famed for depicting the struggle between the gods and the giants. And as we wander around the room, it's not hard to believe that this altar was once dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods. In the adjoining rooms you can find both Roman and Hellenistic architecture, with the remains of majestic temples and ancient statues all on display. And if you then move on to the Museum of the Ancient Near East, you'll be quite literally bowled over by the breathtaking splendour of the Ishtar Gate, which once led to the inner city of Babylon. Constructed in 575 BC, the gateway is completely covered with beautifully coloured glazed bricks, and amongst the enamelled blue tiles, reliefs of brightly coloured dragons and bulls, symbolising the ancient gods, proudly appear. Literally high and mighty, it isn't hard to understand why this glorious gate was at one time considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the world, until being replaced by the Lighthouse of Alexandria in the 6th century AD. Leading up to this incredible artefact is the processional way, which is almost as beautiful as the gateway itself. Decorated with reliefs of lions and glazed yellow tiles, it's quite an incredible experience to walk down the passageway and soak up the atmosphere of the ancient Near East. Should you want to step back even further in time, you can always head to the Altez Museum in search of the relics of ancient Egypt. The world-famous bust of Queen Nefertiti can be found in situ, which dates back to 1430 BC, and most visitors are truly amazed to discover that it still retains its original colour. The Alters Museum has on many occasions been described as the world's most beautiful neoclassical building. And as we stand in the lush garden looking at the museum's 18 iconic columns, the view is truly spectacular. Even people who don't like visiting museums enjoy coming here to sit on the grass and gaze up at the magnificence of the Alters as it dominates this part of the island. And you can also see another great Berlin landmark from here. The Berliner Dom can be seen if you just turn your head slightly to the right, and this really is one of the most beautiful churches in all of Berlin. If you're feeling rather disappointed that we're not going to look at another museum, you needn't worry, because with all the fine treasures inside and exquisite neo-Baroque facade, the Berliner Dom can surely rival what any museum has to offer. From its towering 321-foot copper dome to the stunning stonework and sculptures that surround the exterior, it really is a delight in every way. With this church in such an amazingly good state of repair, it's hard to believe that during the Second World War it was heavily damaged by bomb blasts, because the lengthy restoration programme really has brought it back to life in the most tangible way possible. The process of restoring the Berliner Dom to its former glory as one of the most beautiful churches in the city is a perfect expression of the spirit of Berlin that's risen phoenix-like from the ashes on so many occasions. After enjoying the sights of Museum Island, it's possible to reach our next destination by crossing a most picturesque bridge. This delicately arched construction, with its fine sculptures, was built in 1824 and is a wonderful introduction to the magnificent boulevard Unter den Linden. From here you can listen to the gently flowing waters of the River Spree and appreciate the view of the delightful buildings in the distance, and it's a spot that every visitor to Berlin will greatly enjoy. The avenue, lined with linden trees, hence its name, which translates as under the linden tree, is one of the most attractive you'll find in Berlin. In front of the first line of linden trees, high upon his horse, sits the striking figure of Frederick the Great. The artist Christian Daniel Rach created this mesmerising sculpture in 1851, and it really does appear as if the eponymous hero is standing guard over Unter den Linden, posed at the ready to defend Berlin if the need should ever arise. After taking in the view from the side of Frederick the Great, you can either head off to explore the city's beautiful opera house, the Berlin Museum of History, or the stunning Humboldt University. The choice is simply overwhelming. If you have the time, the best thing to do is simply and slowly stroll the length of Unter den Linden and soak up the atmosphere, the marvellous sights, and visit any of the places that happen to appeal to you. As we travel along the avenue, You may also notice that there are a great number of foreign embassies located in this vicinity. The Hungarian, British and Russian embassies have all found homes here, because, after all, if given a choice of where to reside in Berlin, there's no lovelier or more imposing location than Unter den Linden. If you're tempted to enjoy an evening stroll amongst the embassies and grand buildings, you'll also discover a delightful array of elegant shops, galleries and restaurants, where you can stop a while and gather your thoughts before moving on to our next destination. Reaching the western end of Unter den Linden, you'll be rewarded with the magnificent sight of the Brandenburg Gate lit up by night, and views of the modern buildings of Potsdamer Platz. But it's another fascinating Platz that we're in fact heading for next, the Potsdamer. It's already evident from what's been seen earlier that much of Berlin has been shaped and scarred by the ravages of the Second World War, and this is an area that has totally reinvented itself since then, blossoming with a vibrant energy that really has to be experienced firsthand to be fully appreciated. During the 1920s, Potsdamer Platz was Europe's busiest plaza, constantly noisy with people coming and going, and this was the main centre for entertainment in Berlin. Then, during the Second World War, it was completely destroyed, and as the smoke cleared, all that was left was mountains of rubble. Some believed that Berlin had lost its heart, and Potsdamer Platz remained in this dishevelled state until Germany's reunification in the 1990s. The new united government wanted the renovation of this area to signal the start of the city's rebirth, so almost overnight, Berlin's largest ever building project began, and as we look around us today, it's possible to see just how successful they were. There are wonderful, modernist structures everywhere you gaze, and Potsdamer Platz really has helped to put Berlin on the map of cultural cities. And for anyone in search of energy and exuberance, Potsdamer Platz is definitely the place to go. Even at a glance, you can see that a great deal of thought has gone into the design of this area, and each structure seems to complement the next one perfectly. The German government wanted to make the new plaza a world-class landmark, so it enlisted some of the world's greatest designers, and in every direction there's a new and exciting sight to behold. From the Berlin Film Museum to the mind-blowing Sony Center, Potsdamer Platz is the jewel in the crown of the new Berlin, and is again evidence of the determination of Berliners to move with the times. In many cities of the world, what we've seen so far would be as much as you could manage in one trip, but being a delightfully compact city, visitors to Berlin can see a great deal more. And as we leave the excitement of Potsdamer Platz, there's still time to fit in a few more fascinating locations, even if it's only a weekend break. To the west of the square, you'll find one of Berlin's most famous landmarks, which was, like so many of the city's buildings, left in ruins by the war. However, in complete contrast to the dramatic modernisation of Potsdamer Platz, the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church demonstrates how tradition can be celebrated despite the renovations. Just like the memorial for the murdered Jews of Europe, this church is an extremely emotive site, which also personifies the healing process that Berlin has had to undergo. The original church was first consecrated in 1895, but as you can see for yourself, it was very badly damaged during the Second World War. After the war was over, the rubble was cleared away, leaving only the massive front tower standing. The decision was made, however, instead of starting from scratch, to build around the remains in order to create this wonderful amalgamation of the old and the new. By creating this modern bell tower right next to the original, the designer, Egon Ehrmann, complements the undamaged architecture, and visitors come from all over the world to experience this extraordinary sight. The Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church stands as a poignant reminder of both the destruction of war and the new life that was breathed back into Berlin through the healing process in its aftermath. And if you really want to search out Berlin's vibrancy and spirit of survival, then it's worthwhile spending a little time in the bustling square of Reichstag Platz, which stands in the shadow of the Memorial Church. This area is at the centre of what used to be Old West Berlin, and in the 1960s, the plaza attracted visitors from far and wide with its mixture of fine stores and attractions. Although many of the world-famous names have now moved out, as you look around you'll see that the square still has a special atmosphere where you can sit and take in the wonderful views, enjoy some refreshment, and even some local entertainment. From the centre of this plaza, there are some great views of the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial, and by stopping a while in Reichstag Platz, you'll get a real feeling of the true Berlin. Nevertheless, this isn't to say that this area hasn't worked hard to keep up with the times, which you'll see as we head for one of the city's most famous attractions and the main reason why so many people still flock to this area. The Europa Center is a vast complex and houses everything around it that you could possibly desire. From here, it's possible to go shopping in the 100 stores that are waiting for you to visit, watch a film in the cinema, win some money in the casino, or eat in one of the many restaurants. The Europa Center is like a city within a city, and it would take longer than we have remaining to discover everything the Europa Center has on offer. With its modernist design that engulfs visitors on all sides, and the numerous fountains adorning great public spaces, the Europa Center is a testament to how much Berlin has moved on since the destruction of World War II, manifesting itself as a modern metropolis of the future. And continuing with this theme, it's time to head to the east of the centre to discover a much-admired district of a more contemporary Berlin. Alexanderplatz is one of Berlin's largest public squares, and although its 1960s architecture is not to everyone's taste, it's still well worth visiting while exploring the city, and it really does open yet another chapter in Berlin's rich history. Even though the square today is brimming with 20th century buildings, there has, in fact, been an open space here for hundreds of years. And in the 1800s, it was overflowing with many examples of fine architecture, all of which is long since gone. The reason for such a drastic change, like so many of Berlin's more modern areas, again stems back to the Second World War and the destruction of such huge areas of the city. Alexanderplatz is testament to how Berlin had to quickly pick itself up and begin to reshape itself for the survival of the city's people. Many of the buildings around the square are unlikely to win awards for design, but what's been achieved here is far greater than aesthetic satisfaction. It showed the people of Germany that life had to go on, and walking around this square in the presence of these huge concrete structures, it's worth remembering why they're here, and how they helped Berlin to become the cosmopolitan city that it without doubt has become in the 21st century. While looking around this busy area, one building that really stands head and shoulders above the rest, quite literally, is the colossal Fernsehturm. This massive television tower stands over 1,197 feet tall, and it needs no explanation as to why the locals affectionately call it the toothpick. With its golf ball-shaped middle and red and white antenna, the Fernsehturm can be spotted all over Berlin, and arouses great curiosity in all who see it. The tower was built in 1969, and even though it's now fairly dated compared to more modern buildings, it's still the fourth tallest freestanding structure in Europe. As our eyes work their way up the building's exterior, it's impossible not to be impressed by Fritz Dieter and Unter Franke's design, even if it does make you feel a little dizzy. If you have a good head for heights, then there are some spectacular views from the observation platform, and should climbing the 986 steps to get to the top give you an appetite, you can treat yourself to an unforgettable meal in the tower's superb rotating restaurant. But if you prefer to stay at ground level, you'll find many other sights to see in this area. Stretching out from the television tower to the River Spree is the Marx Engels Forum. This once densely populated area is today a vast empty square, and is once again a reminder of the heavy bombing Berlin suffered during the Second World War. Now the only residents are the statues of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, created by Ludwig Engelhardt in 1986, who sit staring stonily at the Fernsehturm. On both sides of the statues, you'll find steel pillars showing black and white photographs from the socialist era, and behind them a relief wall showing scenes from the history of the German socialist movement. As our time in Berlin is drawing to a close, a visit to the oldest part of Berlin is a must to bring our fascinating journey to its conclusion. And it was here, in the 13th century, on the banks of the River Spree, that a settlement called Berlin first emerged. St. Nicholas Quarter, or the Nikolaiviertel, owns its name to the parish church Nikolaikirche, which was the first and most important parish church in medieval Berlin. The original structure, which was erected around 1230, was a Romanesque basilica, dedicated to St. Nicholas, the patron saint of seafarers and merchants, as well as children and Christmas. But the church itself was built between 1380 and 1450, and is a magnificent example of Gothic architecture. Destroyed by bombing in the Second World War, it was rebuilt by 1987 and is now a museum, providing the perfect centrepiece to Nikolai Viertel. You'll also notice a beautiful statue of the famous Berlin Bear standing in a cage outside the main door, guarding Nikolai Kircher from any unwanted guests. If the modern attractions of the Fernsetum and Alexanderplatz are not to your taste, then you're sure to find plenty to please you in this historic district. Take the time to wander down the cobbled streets around the church, and you can lose yourself amongst the narrow alleyways crammed with souvenir shops, restaurants and small museums, while the many stunning public sculptures that adorn street corners and squares are an added bonus. And it's here that we must bring this delightful journey around Berlin to a close. Hopefully you'll have enjoyed what you've seen and been encouraged to come and visit this wonderful city for yourself. The reason that this is so important is because of the preconceptions so many of us have whenever Berlin is mentioned. Anyone who imagines a city beset with the troubles of the past is in for a big surprise, because post-World War II, the way Berlin has rebuilt itself to move forward into the 21st century is truly remarkable. The atmosphere wherever you go is friendly and welcoming, and this is one city where even the most demanding of visitors will have their expectations not only met, but also exceeded again, and again.